Hello, good afternoon and welcome. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Joining me today is GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 4 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl also required hospital treatment, with one of them suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowland says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The search for the remaining 4 passengers has been halted until Monday. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. He wants minimum service levels to be set in law. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs on Monday. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. Sir Keir Starmer is calling for an overhaul of the NHS, saying it must reform or it will die. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says a future Labour government would turn GPs into direct NHS employees, rather than allowing them to run their own practices. He also announced plans to allow some patients, such as those with back pain, to self-refer themselves to specialists.
We'll double the number of medical students using money from abolishing the non-dom status for the super rich, but also we need to look at the way GPs operate and see whether we can't make changes there, things which will actually preserve the NHS going forward. The moment what the government's doing is really just presiding over managed decline, and that I will not accept. Of course there will be challenges whenever you reform something, but frankly, if you don't reform the NHS, then I fear it will die.
The Prime Minister is asking government ministers to help persuade global allies to give more support to Ukraine and help break the stalemate with Russia. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced the UK would be sending 14 tanks to Kiev. With the first anniversary of the war approaching, Mr Sunak is stressing the need for an international strategy. Former Major General Chip Chapman was head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. He told us Russia isn't backing down.
So it's really this shift in the red lines which will probably lead to other countries in the next 2 weeks also giving armour to the Ukrainians, which gives them this idea of a winning faster strategy in 2023. But of course, the enemy on the other side gets a vote in that, and it looks like the Russians are going to mobilise another 500,000 men this year on top of the 300,000 they mobilised in October. So there's a lot of hard fighting to come yet.
Russia has launched a major missile attack on Ukraine, striking vital energy facilities across the country and destroying an apartment building. Officials say at least 21 people have been killed and 40 are still unaccounted for. Ukrainian authorities say the coming days will be difficult, with threats to the supply of electricity, water and heating during the height of winter. And the UK is facing more than 100 flood warnings, with cold and wet conditions set to continue well into next week. The Environment Agency had issued 192 flood alerts, whilst yellow warnings for ice are in place for much of Scotland and the northwest and northeast of England. The Met Office is also warning that a few centimetres of snow is likely at low levels. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Nana.
It is fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, would you take a simple blood test which can detect cancer before symptoms develop? I did that just a few weeks ago. Now, the British medical chair today said that people are getting sicker, which is one of the reasons why the NHS is in such a mess. Yes, that is part of the problem, but the NHS also spends its money on crud, like rainbow crossings and diversity and inclusion. We need to get real. The NHS can't pay for everything. Maybe then it also needs to change its way of thinking. Now, last week I took a blood test that could determine with over a 92% level of accuracy whether or not I have cancer, and it can detect where the cancer comes from. So I'm in the reception of the clinic and I'm about to get my blood test to see whether or not I have any sign of cancer. I don't really want to do it, but you know what? It'll save time and energy. Instead of people cutting you open and finding stuff, you might as well find out straight away, as soon as possible. Well, you can tell I did my own makeup. But instead of going for a mammogram or going for prostate and bowel cancer checks or having invasive and potentially dangerous biopsies in the brain, all of which are costly and labour intensive, isn't it about time the NHS invested our money in safer, faster and more cost-effective treatments? On the NHS, I'd had a routine mammogram, which was because of my age, which was clear, and an ultrasound, but had been called back over a series of appointments. They initially sent me 2 letters, one of which was cancelled. The second one was the actual appointment. Unfortunately, no one told the computer about the cancelled first appointment, and it continuously invited me to both via Royal Mail for different days, which is costly and a waste of time. It became so confusing which one was the actual appointment that on 2 occasions I was turned away from the hospital because I'd got the wrong day. I even cancelled work to attend one of those. I got so bored, so instead I did a simple blood test. Why on earth would you not? If you could find out within weeks what type of cancer and where it originates, what's not to like, surely those in the NHS would jump at the chance. But in 2019, the Royal College of GPs issued a statement on its position with things like this. It said that GPs should not have to deal with results of any screening services that fall outside of those authorised for the NHS. They were concerned that the results would potentially swamp it. Frankly, the NHS wouldn't be able to cope. It seems that the NHS itself is resistant to change, as Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting pointed out when he clashed with doctors' groups in recent weeks after suggesting that they are overtly resistant to change. He suggested radical reforms such as nationalising GP surgeries and warned that medics must work more flexible hours to accommodate their patients. Finally, our politicians from both sides have woken up about the need for an overhaul of the NHS. Now, in the Telegraph, Dr Tippett from the Cancer Screening Trust, behind the cancer blood test that I took, said that some people are very nervous about the extra diagnostic burden of knowing someone in their family died from a disease that might affect them. To be able to get answers and to get them early can be a great relief. But it's also about time people started taking more care and accountability for their own health as well. It's no coincidence that during the pandemic, the UK was one of the worst hit. We were one of the unhealthiest of the developed nations. Well, I'm pleased to say my results were negative. But if it was available on the NHS, would you like to know if you had cancer as soon as possible? Would you take the test? Or is ignorance bliss? Right, so before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should everyone be allowed to strike? As the strikes get progressively worse, the Royal College of Nurses, or RCN, has warned that if not enough progress on pay negotiations is made by the end of the month, the next nurses' strike will be twice as big. Now, this comes as teachers are also planning to strike. The National Education Union, or NEU, and the National Association of Head Teachers, the NAHT, the 2 main teaching unions, will be revealing the results of their ballots tomorrow. And to counteract this, the government are attempting to bring in a minimum service requirement legislation bill. It seems that everyone is having a pop, but should they all be allowed? I'll be asking, should everyone have the right to strike? Then stay tuned at 5:50. It's World View. Danny Armstrong will get the latest on the war in Ukraine, and then we'll go stateside to Paul Duddridge and get the lowdown on Donald Trump's campaign and the latest revelations of President Biden. Then, at 5, it's this week's Outside. My mystery guest is an aristocrat who has been in the public eye all her life. She has friends in high places and rubs alongside royalty. In fact, she's even met Prince Harry. Her eventful life and career is well documented, but who is she? Stay tuned, that's all on the way in the next hour. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel GB News presenter Andrew Pearce and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Right, so I'm going to ask you both. Right, I'll start with you, Danny.
Wow.
OK, so if you had a blood test that could tell you up to 70 different types of cancer and it was available, would you take it?
First of all, I heard the nation cheer when it was disclosed that Nana is cancer-free. Quite right. Not only is she beautiful on the outside, she seems to be working very well on the inside. I would take it. In fact, because I'm overweight, listen, I'm 3 stone overweight, 4 stone overweight.
Only 3?
3 or 4 stone overweight. For the benefit of the people listening on the radio, I'm a fat northern lad. But I used to be a lot lighter when I was boxing and everything. I used to be a hell of a lot lighter. I take blood tests every now and again, say once every 3 or 4 weeks, just with a prick of the finger for diabetes, because I'm prone. Listen, I've got a tummy on me. But the one way I like to think that I can beat the potential of diabetes is the fact that I go for massive walks. And so far, I'm 52 years old, I'm fat. I know I am. I've lost 4 pounds.
Well done.
Thank you, Andrew. I was never going to get it.
How?
I was never going to get a well done out of her. I've lost 4 pounds since January. I didn't quite hear that insult.
That's just as well.
So yes, 20 question. Blood test, why not? Preventative.
And you would be up for that?
Very much so.
Andrew?
100%.
Yeah.
And actually, it would save the NHS a lot of money. That's the irony, because early detection is everything, isn't it? If you find a cancer soon enough, particularly things like prostate cancer, my age, I'm vulnerable to that. They say if you get it early, you treat it early, it saves money and it saves lives.
Well,
but there again, you've got the medical establishment against it, because that's the problem with the NHS.
Yeah.
This is a real game changer in my view, and they're against it.
Well, the thing is, they're worried about the influx that would happen because they wouldn't be able to cope. And I mean, what's the point?
They can't cope now.
Well, it's just ridiculous.
But also the GPs are against it, because the GPs is the opening door to the NHS. If you've got a bad shoulder, if you've got internal bleeding, I would suggest you go to a GP first, rather than Keir Starmer saying if you've got internal bleeding, just self-diagnose yourself. I know we're going to come on to that later. The GPs, I didn't realise this, but they actually are self-employed limited companies, and they work for themselves, so they are in self-protection mode, because if all of a sudden you can demonstrate to the National Health Service that you don't need a GP in order to refer yourself for this, or a blood test in your case, Nana, that's why they want to protect the entity of a GP surgery. Now, in Germany, the GPs work for the government, so they are employed, if you like.
There's also, just on this jab, this test might have disclosed that you had an absolutely lethal cancer, and you only had a month to live. We've heard of people who get a diagnosis, 2 weeks later, they're gone. So this could it could enable you then to plan your end, all sorts of differences it would make. It's like a form of palliative care.
But the other side of it is that a lot of people don't actually want to know.
No.
Because then oh, God, what am I going to do about it? I've got to live with this in my mind. I mean, it was not an easy...
Well, you can make changes, can't you?
But it wasn't an easy thing,
No.
I did it and then I thought...
How nervous were you, waiting for the result?
At the beginning, I was nervous and I thought, well, what can I do? At least if you know it's there, it's not going to change if you don't know it's there. It's still there.
Yeah.
So let's find out. So I was nervous for maybe about 10 minutes afterwards. Then I had other things to do. I got really busy and got on with my life.
And how long does it take to get the results?
It took about 8 to 10 days.
That's a long time.
And this was at the NHS, was it?
Well, no, this one I actually went to...
So this is private health care?
The NHS aren't going to do this.
But that's what I'm saying. So my point is that, I know these tests are still... They're checking to see how effective they are. And so far, with the levels of efficiency, they had about 40,000 people who did the test. And so far, the level of efficiency is about 92.1% in terms of actually diagnosing the cancer. And then a 93-point-something% of finding the organ of origin. So finding where the cancer is actually coming from in the first place. But it does it at a really early early stage.
That's
when
brilliant.
it's really
And as you say, it's cheaper and less intrusive and less staff intensive than a mammogram or a colonoscopy and all the other forms.
Or a biopsy in the brain or something like
Really
that.
unpleasant.
If you spin it round, why wouldn't the National
I
Health
wouldn't know.
Service want you to know that you're in the early stages of cancer?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
think,
Or late stages.
Well, I think they're looking into using these sort of tests, but you know, they need to get on with it.
They
need to
do.
get on with it. Get on with it.
Fast.
Stop talking about it. Just get
Yeah,
on with it.
yeah.
Well, anyway. Oh, over to
And we're
you.
glad you're fine.
Oh,
Well,
thank God for that.
I feel listen, would you take a test? I mean, look, seriously, some people would say yes, but I know that my producer and others said no, they wouldn't even
Really?
want to know.
Really?
No, they wouldn't want to know. They didn't want to know. But if you just tuned in, what about you? Get in touch. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should everyone have the right to strike? The government has announced a new strike minimum service levels bill, which will allow certain public services to maintain a basic function when workers go on strike by employers issuing work notices to ensure minimum safety levels are met. However, some people believe this is an attack on workers' rights, especially those in key public services. What do you think? Send me your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. And I've got a poll up right now asking, should everyone have the right to strike? Cast your vote now. But first, let's get an update with your weather.
Hello again. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, but looking ahead weather-wise, and it's going to remain cold. There'll be snow for some of us, but also quite a bit of winter sunshine to look forward to as well. The reason for the cold weather is this area of low pressure to the east of us. That's allowing for our winds to come from the north, so cold Arctic air plunging across the UK, which is why it's going to be so cold. Notice this weather system waiting out in the west. That's going to fringe south coastal parts as we go through Sunday night. Otherwise, for many through Sunday night, yes, there'll be some clear spells. Also, some showery rain, sleet or snow across some northern parts could lead to something of an ice risk here. And snow showers piling in from the north across parts of Scotland. These totals could build up as we go through the night. It is going to be a cold night, even in the south, some places falling below freezing, could get as low as -10 in the sheltered parts of Scotland. The rain, sleet and snow across parts of the southeast could cause some problems early doors, but that will clear away as we go through the morning. Otherwise then, through Monday, for many, it is going to be largely dry with lots of winter sunshine around. Yes, there'll be some showers towards the east and also plenty of showers towards parts of Scotland, and here they are readily going to be falling as snow. But for many, largely dry with sunny spells. Despite that though, it's cold, colder than today for most places, generally staying in mid-single figures Celsius. Little change for many as we go through Monday evening, and so most places staying largely clear, but continue to see snow showers across parts of Scotland, and then some showery rain, sleet and snow starting to push in from the southwest as we go through the night. Need to keep an eye on this because there could be some significant snow across some southwestern parts as we go through the early hours of Tuesday. It is going to be a colder night than this coming night for many, could even get as low as -11 or -12 perhaps in the sheltered glens of Scotland. Through Tuesday then, a cold, frosty, icy start for many of us first thing. Watch out for this showery rain, sleet and snow across southern parts. A little bit of uncertainty regarding how much snow we're going to see, but it is worth keeping up to date with that. There'll be further wintry weather as we go through the rest of the week, perhaps drier on Thursday, but staying cold. Bye-bye for now. See you later.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
So it is just coming up to 21 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, before the break, we were discussing, would you take a cancer screening test, a blood test? Let's have a look at what you've been saying. Jay says, congrats, Nana, on the great news. Wishing you the very best for 2023. Thank you. Mr. L says, yes, I would definitely have a blood test. I go for normal screenings anyway for my age. So if it was quicker and saved money all round, I can't see a problem. Leo says, I'm involved in the NHS cancer trials and hope this is a good outcome for us all. After having cancer cut out from my shoulder in 2018, I feel this is a positive way ahead. Absolutely, and I'm glad you're well. Right, well, let's carry on because it's the time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should everyone be allowed to strike? Now, the Royal College of Nurses, the RCN, have warned that if not enough progress on pay negotiations are made by the end of the month, the next nurses' strike will be twice as big. As the country becomes ever more reminiscent of the strike-ridden 1970s and 80s, you remember those? I wasn't alive then. Oh, okay, I was, I admit. The teachers are also now planning to go on strike with the National Education Union and the National Association of Head Teachers set to reveal their results from their ballots tomorrow. However, the government strike's minimum service levels bill aims to allow certain public services, such as health and education, to maintain a basic function when workers go on strike, by employers issuing work notices to ensure minimum safety levels are met. Despite this, the government's own impact assessment suggests this bill could lead to an increased frequency of strikes with and more adverse effects in long term. So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should everyone be allowed to strike? Joining me now is Rebecca Reid, author and journalist, Belinda Lucy, former Brexit Party MEP, Jerry Hicks, trade unionist, Suzanne Evans, and political commentator. Right, Jerry, I'm going to start with you then. Should everyone be allowed to strike? Anyone, regardless of profession?
Of course, everyone should have the right to strike. In fact, governments shouldn't have the right to ban them. I think it's the duty of employers and the government to make sure things never get so bad that people feel the need to strike. If you ban strikes, then people may well feel they have to vent their frustrations and angers in other ways. And I think the majority of people share my views. Otherwise, the Tories wouldn't be tanking in the polls.
Well, you say that,
I think
Jerry,
it's a distraction.
Well,
I think it's a big distraction, by the way. It's only the Great Debate because the Tories are trying to demonise trade unionists to distract from their own abstract failures.
Well, you say that, Jerry, but I do remember Mark Sorotka, he from the PCS union, saying that he wanted to bring down the government with strikes. I mean, that's a union trying to take advantage of a situation and actually subverting democracy, I would say, don't you think?
Well, no, I don't think that's subversing democracy at all. I think I walk the streets of Bristol and I see in people's windows general election now. People are desperate for a change of government. They want to see the back of the Tories. Shame on the Tories for demonising and scapegoating, whether it's trade unionists or Extinction Rebellion or refugees and asylum seekers. All they're doing is trying to hide from their own failures. And if you ban strikes, people will vent their frustration in other ways.
This is only proving what I was saying, because this sounds like an anti-Tory rant. Let's bring in Belinda Lucy. Belinda.
I think the poor British public are really caught in the centre of a strike Olympics at the moment. We have a very politicised public sector, which sometimes feels like an extended arm of the Labour Party, using the maximum damage to the British public as a stick to bash the Tories with. I have great sympathy with the working conditions for junior doctors and nurses. And, God, I only wish that they could have a pay rise. But the unreasonable demands and the threats of strikes have really crossed a line And I believe that we are now being used, the British public are being used as a football between very, very left-wing elements of trade unions and the public sector in their political battle to try and get the Tories out. Now, listen, when you choose a career that sustains life, to think you can withdraw that service when you're demanding unreasonable pay rises during a cost of living crisis, I don't think that's right. I do agree with Rishi's minimal service laws, because France has it. I mean, France is like the godfather king of all strikes, and they have it on their statute books. It's not an anti-strike law. This is the bare minimum Rishi should be doing.
Well, let's bring Rebecca Reid in on that. So there's the bare minimum that Rishi should be doing. Anti-strike law. It's not anti-strike, but it's just making sure that things can function. What do you think?
The only piece of legislation that I would support in terms of changing how striking works is I can see the argument that I think actually Liz Truss wanted to bring in, surprising person to agree with, that it needs to be 50% of trade union members to be able to pass a strike. It does seem a little bit strange to me that fewer than half, so less than a majority of the union can want to strike and the strike still happens. But I'm frustrated when people suggest that there are certain careers who shouldn't be allowed to strike, because I think we all fundamentally agree that if we were to say nurses wouldn't be paid at all, everyone would agree that they shouldn't have to keep working. So at that point, you accept that they would have the right to not work on a financial basis. So then all you're doing is negotiating out what you think is a reasonable or unreasonable reason to strike. But fundamentally, everyone deep down agrees they should be allowed to withdraw their services if they're provoked.
Interesting, but that's never going to happen. That they're not going to be paid at all. That's a very wide. That's never going to happen. And also, the government have independent pay bodies that determine how much the nurses get paid, and they always get an increase with these, whether it's up with inflation. Whereas in a private sector, you wouldn't get that.
What I'm trying. Maybe I wasn't clear enough, but what I'm trying to say is that nursing is a vocational job, but the job part is just as important as the vocation. And these are not people who are volunteering their services because they feel like it. It is a career, it is a job, and we have this sort of fetish for calling nurses heroes and saints, but they're not. They're people with jobs who go to work to get paid.
Suzanne, your view?
Yeah, so Nana, you started to mention independent pay review bodies. Now, isn't it interesting how the unions never argue about the independent review bodies that operate and set pay levels for the public sector? It's never them they go after, it's always the government. And I think we've heard already in this debate today a lot of anti-government rhetoric. And I think we are at a stage now where these strikes are actually an attempt to bring down the government. Now, let's look at what the government's actually proposing. Now, as far as I'm aware, the only service that currently isn't allowed to go on strike at the moment is the police force. Now, I think we'd all agree, I hope, that it would be very wrong for someone to be burgled or to be the victim of a crime, perhaps a very serious and violent crime, and the police do absolutely nothing. Now, you might argue they're not doing enough already, but for them to do absolutely nothing, I hope we'd all agree is completely wrong. So perhaps we back that legislation. So what Rishi Sunak wants to do is to extend this to the health service, to fire and rescue, to education, to transport, to the nuclear industry, and to the border service. Now, I would argue that all those things are just as crucial. You do need to know that the health service is going to be there. Now, perhaps you ring an ambulance on a non-strike day today, and it's taking a very long time for them to arrive, and there are all kinds of reasons for that. Education, the teachers now announcing a new strike. Teachers' unions have ruined the education of children in this country over the past 2 years because of their insistence on shutting schools during COVID, even though children weren't at risk. The country cannot be held to ransom by the unions, and I think having a minimum service level in all these industries is an extremely good idea. It's the taxpayer ultimately, and yes, people in the public sector pay taxes.
I want to bring Jerry in on this.
Where is the accountability for this?
Let me bring Jerry in on this. Jerry, did you hear that? I mean, they're holding us to ransom. The unions are holding us to ransom.
I did, thank you. It seems to me that the last session is spilling into this. Ignorance is bliss. Already there are the minimum safety levels ensured in the NHS, in the fire service. They're already there. It is a complete distraction from the Tory failures. Do you know, in the NHS, the nurses, I've been on the picket lines, I speak with them. My daughter-in-law is a nurse. They're striking for pay, for better conditions, but to save the NHS. because they can see it being run down year after year of underfunding. It really is a nonsense to suggest that these things are. Rishi Sunak knows that.
Suzanne, because you made a comment. You said they're trying to save the NHS. Suzanne's got something to say. What's that? Go on, Suzanne.
Yeah, as I say, I'm no Tory, I'm no particular government supporter, but the fact is, the government spending that's been increased by 39% when you take into account inflation on the NHS. I'm afraid this rhetoric that the NHS is being run down, underfunded, is complete nonsense when you actually look at the facts. It's just rhetoric, that's all it is.
Well, Rebecca.
39% increase in funding for the NHS since 2010, since we had...
Rebecca, let's get Rebecca talking. Rebecca.
It's really difficult, isn't it? It has been proved that you could spend infinite money on the NHS. There is no cap to what you could spend. The difficulty is I don't trust the Conservative government to in any way bring in any fee-paying structure without it being a backdoor to full privatisation. And ultimately, I think it comes back to the fact that they have been in power too long. They are tired. They are out of ideas. Everybody's angry with them because literally everything that's happened for the last 13 years is their fault. That's a definitive...
It can't all be their fault. Belinda, Lucy, let's counteract that. It's all the Tories' fault.
No, well, I'm not a Conservative myself, but I definitely see that the Conservative government have allowed mismanagement of the NHS and NHS managers to get away with awful wastage of our money. The NHS has enough money. We don't need to spend another penny on the NHS, but no one is accountable for its mismanagement and the waste of our taxpayers' money. They just keep attacking the public purse for all their failures. Now, that's not necessarily all down to the government. That's a lot to do with NHS managers. And where are they? We never hear them speak. They're never accountable for anything.
Well, you make a good point. You make a good point, but they are allocated money, then they determine how that's going to be distributed. So I think, actually, a lot of the managers there in the NHS have a lot to answer for as well. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
What about PPE? What about PPE and the billions wasted during COVID? Billions upon billions.
Billions were wasted. Yes, that's true. That is true. That was wasted. Anything else? I absolutely agree with you there. Thank you very much, Jerry. Jerry Hicks, trade unionist, Belinda Lucy, former Brexit Party MEP, and Suzanne Evans, political commentator. Well, let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Harriet says everyone does, but this is with regard to whether you have a right to strike or not. Everyone does, but it's got the risk of being fired or not going your way. Basically, all those reasons you agreed to the job in the first place are under threat. Elliot says, no, you can't have the army or the police, who actually both aren't allowed to strike, going out on strike as the two most obvious. The vast majority should have the right to strike, of course, but not everyone. And Cameron says that vital infrastructure workers shouldn't be allowed to strike, but should also have a contract with protective policy regarding wage increase, inflation and working conditions. Well, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's fast approaching 34 minutes after 4 o'clock. After the break, we'll continue the great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, should everyone be allowed to strike? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Coming up, though, stay with me at 5. It's Outside. My guest today has been very outspoken about Harry and Meghan. Who could they be? Keep guessing. Stay tuned to find out. First, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. It's 33 minutes past 4. I'm Bethany Elsey with the latest from the GB newsroom. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl also required hospital treatment, with one of them suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowland says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The search for the remaining 4 passengers has been halted until Monday. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay, who wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. It comes as anti-strike legislation, which would require minimum service levels, is due to be debated by MPs on Monday. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Nana will be back with you in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
So, welcome back. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now it's time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should everyone be allowed to strike? The Royal College of Nurses have warned that if not enough progress on pay negotiations are made by the end of the month, the next nurses' strike will be twice as big. Now, the government strike's minimum service level bill aims to allow certain public services to maintain a basic function and ensure minimum safety levels are met in a bid to curtail strikes. But despite this, the government's own impact assessment suggests that the bill could lead to an increased frequency of strikes. I don't see how that could be, but maybe you can tell me. With adverse effects in the long term. So, the Great British Debate, I'm asking, should everyone be allowed to strike? Well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. I'm going to start with you, Andrew. Should everyone be allowed to strike?
Well, look, they're not now.
No.
So the police can't, and the army can't. So that's the armed forces, because one of the most important jobs of any government is the protection of the citizens, protection of the realm. I'm loath to say you ban certain categories, but I do think. Who was it? One of your panellists there said you go into a caring profession designed to save lives and make people better, and then you go on strike knowing that could lead to a loss of life, deterioration in health. The teachers are going to vote tomorrow. Well, we're going to find out tomorrow if they're going on strike. The Children's Commissioner, Rachel de Souza, has said in a piece in one of the newspapers today, this will damage children. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. That's what she's saying. It should not be allowed to happen because kids have already been stuffed by the education unions during COVID because they insisted that schools weren't safe and teachers would be exposed to COVID. So children have had a terrible, torrid time. And the idea that they're going to go on strike again. So I think the government has to toughen up this minimum service law. In Spain, for instance, last year, the Spanish government legislated because they wanted to stop Ryanair grounding all the planes because that's the end of their tourist industry. Spain can't manage without tourism. In France last year, where they have a lot of strikes, the French government used the same legislation to stop a strike at oil refineries, which was in danger of paralysing the country. Why aren't we doing it? We should be. We should be going a lot further, a lot tougher.
The principle of withdrawing your labour, I think, is an important principle that should be protected. But there are certain industries and certain, maybe not industries, but there are certain professions. And I think the NHS, unfortunately, for the people who work in it, I think it falls into that category of being so important for other people. Now, the teachers, if they go on strike, it's going to affect children's education. Doctors and nurses walk out, potentially it's going to cost people lives. And I think when it is almost on a basis of potential mortality, then I think that should be classified differently to trade strikes or teacher strikes, because teachers are public servants, so they can decide to go on strike. I disagree with the trade union guy who was just blinded by his loathing
hatred of the Tories.
You see, you get him on to talk, and this is typical, unfortunately, you get him on to talk about one subject and he wanders off and starts talking about asylum seekers. You know, he is blinded by his
and Extinction
loathing.
Rebellion, and ghastly.
I don't know why I don't know why he was in or not.
And let's not forget one of the big donors of Extinction Rebellion gives money to the Labour Party.
Right.
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, opinions like that hold back reasonable, impartial views like mine and almost sway me to forming other opinions. Because it's so one-sided. It's just the loathing. And also what he should be careful of is because the new Labour of Keir Starmer, they've already said 19% is ridiculous. Yeah. The nurses want 19% and then they've reduced it to 10%. I run my own business. I would love to pay people a few bob more. You want to try being a private individual who runs a business?
Well, that's the point, isn't it?
And the other thing is, of course, look, we think inflation, it's going to tumble.
Down.
And fast. And wholesale gas prices now, I know they buy the gas way in advance, but wholesale gas prices have collapsed almost now to the level before the invasion of Ukraine. Inflation could be down to 5% by November, December. And these wretched unions are asking for a 20% pay rise, paid for by everybody watching this programme out of their taxes.
Well, ASLEF, I mean, they were offered, was it 8% for their drivers? The drivers are on 60 grand.
Before overtime.
That would have brought it to 65 grand. Okay, that's a pretty good salary.
Pretty good.
They turned it down because the condition was that they would have to modernise. And they didn't really want to do that because that could mean that some people would be made redundant because obviously to get that money, they're going to have to find it from somewhere. This is the problem. These trade unions
and the RMT is insisting that there must be no debate about no driver-only trains when we've had driver-only trains in this country for 30 years. And Mick Lynch from the RMT often goes to work from West London into Central London on a driver-only train. So what's the problem with them, Mr Lynch?
And the thing is, a lot of these trade union bosses as well are on six-figure sums.
Six figures,
So, like, I mean, I think it was 30 out of the top trade unions were earning over 150 grand. You know, Mick Lynch, I think he's on over 80 grand or whatever it is.
And that's his basic.
He's not going to stop. He's not going to not have money.
Which means there are add-ons.
So
well, there's the free travel on the driver-only train.
Is that right? I'll tell you what would be interesting. If you sat down with the unions and said, OK, look, at the moment inflation's high, you're asking for 19%. If we give you a pay rise, but what I do want to do is make a caveat in the contract that when inflation plummets, then it's going to be index-linked. So we will track, if you like, a mortgage tracker that tracks the base of the Bank of England. OK, so we will track that, and if it drops, so then your salary will drop.
But they're lucky because
it'd be interesting to see what they say.
Yeah, but they're lucky because a lot of these public sector workers also, their pay is reviewed by a independent pay body, so they determine how much they're going to get paid. Well, in a private company, if you don't like the wage, you're out. So there's no, you know, they have already a lovely edge, a really nice advantage there, that their pay will constantly be reviewed, especially the nurses and doctors and so on and so forth, to ensure that they are always getting a pay rise. And so I think they need to acknowledge that.
But the union wallers, they're saying that, well, they're not impartial. They're now starting to question the impartiality of this independent pay review board.
Yeah, it's on the tin. It's called independent. And they've been around for 40 years. but suddenly they're not independent anymore because this lot have decided they're not independent enough.
Yeah, yeah.
But
what do they want then? They want obviously a Corbyn-type character, because Keir Starmer isn't the answer to Jerry.
No.
He's not?
No, absolutely not.
He's a new
I hope
Labour
not.
type.
Well, I mean, we've got loads of strikes. I mean, on Monday, we've got the bus drivers, we've got the EIS as well. On Wednesday, you've got the nurses, the Royal College of Nursing. Then you've also got the EA, so Environment Agency workers.
Will anyone notice?
No, nobody cares. On Thursday, we've got the nurses again. Then more than 1,000 workers of the Welsh Ambulance Service will strike. Bus drivers.
Run by the Labour Party,
exactly.
the NHS in Wales.
The following week, you've got Unison, you've got ambulance workers, you've got loads of it's going on. Bus drivers on Wednesday. The following Thursday, Bello again, bus drivers and NHS physiotherapy staff, employers. I mean, it's just on and on
it's
and
orchestrated.
on. It's orchestrated.
It is, isn't it? And it is designed to bring down the government.
It is.
Yeah. So what do you think? I personally don't think everyone should be allowed to strike.
No.
I think blue light things, so for example, ambulance drivers, no. Anybody like that, police, army, no.
And by the way, the ambulance, I think they do a great job. They're paramedics, they save lots of lives. They are the one organisation, without a doubt, in the NHS that the Institute for Physical Studies, no less, says their pay has kept pace with inflation in the last decade.
And some of them aren't actually paid that badly. Right, well, this show is Nothing Without You and Your Views. Let's welcome our great British voices, your opportunity to tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Who have I got? Well, where should we go? I've got two of you, actually. I'm going to Kidderminster. And let's go to John Reid. Is it John? Two people. There's Kidderminster and Jess as well. All right, let's go. John Reid, I'll start with you. John, should everyone be allowed to strike?
Nana, good afternoon. Of course they should have the right to strike. We live in a democracy, don't we? That's what I've understood anyway. I'm 75 in April and I've relied on the National Health Service all my life and continue to do so. Do you know, if I was a nurse working in the National Health Service and I wasn't earning enough money to feed my children, which is quite the case for some of them who have to go to food banks, and I wandered into Sainsbury's and said, do you mind letting me have a bit of a discount because I can't afford to pay the full bill? Of course not. They'd say, no, clear off. I think the whole thing about the whole situation we're in is everybody should have a living wage. And there are plenty of people that are not getting a living wage.
Yes.
So I'm 100% with the right to strike.
So you'd be happy if the police were able to strike and the armed forces as well, because they can't strike, because that's everyone.
I would, but with the right to strike goes the responsibility, doesn't it? Well, they're in a position where they have to take responsibility for the actions and the jobs that they're doing. So yeah, I'd be happy for anybody to strike if they had to, but they shouldn't have to. They should have a management in place that pays them the rate for the job. And this government we've got now for the last X number of years haven't done that.
Well, I mean, you know, some people would beg to differ with that. Jess Gill, she's there in Reading.
Well, I think that everyone should have the freedom to strike. I think there's, of course, consequences towards that. But I'm a bigger capitalist than Margaret Thatcher. I believe strongly in the free market. And I think if workers want to increase their working conditions, increase their pay, I think we should encourage people of this country to be ambitious. The reason why we're in this situation is because of the government, because of inflation, because of big government programmes. The workers shouldn't be punished by this. I think we need to hold our politicians to accountable. I don't blame the unions. I blame the politicians.
Well, we're the ones that are being punished by it, though, let's be honest. I mean, that's what's happening. They're striking, we're being punished, despite the fact that a lot of their wages are decided independently of the government, which is probably why the government didn't step in. So your view, both of you think that everyone should have the right to strike. Jess, even the police and army?
I think that's a bit more complicated, but I think if we decrease the size of the state, we'd have more funding towards the things like police and the army.
But that's everyone. So you're saying that the police and army should be allowed to strike?
Like, I agree that we shouldn't encourage people. I think the standards should be good enough as it is. I think we should make sure that police and people in the army should have a living wage, but that's not what it is at the moment. And again, I think people should be encouraged to be ambitious.
OK, well, listen, Jess Gill, thank you very much. And also, John Reid in Kidderminster, lovely to talk to you. Those are my great British voices. Right, today I've been asking, should everyone have the right to strike? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Martin says public safety, healthcare and transportation, probably no. But to balance that, the other side should be required by law to negotiate in good faith, and binding arbitration should be triggered much earlier. Elliot says, no, you can't have the army or police going on strike. As the two most obvious, the vast majority should have the right to strike. But of course not everyone. Trisha says, yes, they should. Otherwise, we are a dictatorship. Navi says, yes, only if your strike is not going to interrupt others and cause trouble. Well, that's pretty much Also, you have the right to quit your job, and if you're not happy with it, that's the point. You can quit if you don't like it. Right now, there's a poll up on Twitter throughout the show asking, should everyone have the right to strike? Currently, 45% of you say yes, 55% of you say no. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for World View. Rishi Sunak has stated he will send Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine in order to aid the conflict, and host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Dudridge, will be giving us all the latest on Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That's all after this.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament.
But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 52 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. If you've just joined me, I'm Nana Akua. We are the People's Channel, and don't forget, you can also download the GB News app so you can find out all the shows that happen here on the channel. But now it's time for World View. And Rishi Sunak has confirmed that he's sending Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine to aid in the conflict. Additionally, the body of a missing British aid worker was allegedly discovered in Ukraine. Joining me in studio to talk all things Russia is political commentator and Russia expert Danny Armstrong. Danny, OK, so what's Rishi pledging? These tanks, are they game-changing?
Well, they're not really game-changing, but if we cast our mind back to when Rishi Sunak started his premiership, he was talking tough on Russia and Vladimir Putin. He's really got to follow that and follow through. It's 14 Challenger 2 tanks that are being issued from the UK to Ukraine. It's not really a large amount, but the point of it...
I think it's 10% of the UK's fleet, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, in that regard, it is. I mean, and the UK is the second largest military aid provider to Ukraine, so it's quite, high up there. Behind, of course, the US, which has pledged tens and tens of billions of dollars. I'm sure Paul Dudridge, who's on after me, can tell you more about that. These tanks are very, well, the technology of the tanks is very, very high tech. It's important they don't get into the Russians' hands, of course. It's not, as you say, it's not really game changing, but it's Rishi Sunak following through on what he was talking tough about Putin and about Russia. Of course, these tanks are very, very good across rough terrain. That's important because, of course, it's not the greatest of conditions over there, especially at this time of year. It's
very cold, yeah.
It's very, very cold and very, very hard to get anything done on the ground. But yeah, this is Rishi Sunak, of course, following through on his hard talk about Russia and Putin at the start of his premiership.
Now, of course, we got news as well of a body that's been discovered that could be this aid worker, the British aid worker. Do we know more about that?
Well, yeah, these are two British aid workers who went over to Ukraine to volunteer. They were volunteering in evacuations, of course, according to sources that are very close to the two men. They went missing, or the communication was kind of stopped or was lost with both men some time ago around the city of Soledar, which there's been huge fighting. Soledar is very, very strategically important because it's only about 15 kilometres away from Bakhmut. And whoever takes Soledar could cut off the supply links to Bakhmut. Now, the two men, Chris Parry and Andrew Bagshaw, that have gone missing, one body was actually found, or allegedly found, of the two men. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the head of Russia's mercenary group Wagner, said that this is one of the bodies of the two men. The group published documents of the two men, passports and their permission to volunteer, but we don't know yet. Okay. We're wishing for the best with the two men, but it's important to stress that these two men went over there to volunteer, to evacuate people. They weren't killed in fighting, as the Wagner mercenary group alleges.
Okay, well, listen, Danny, thank you very much for that. Right, that's political commentator Danny Armstrong. Right, let's travel over to America now. We're going to have a chat with the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge. Paul, lovely to talk to you again. Tell us about Joe Biden. There's some trouble going on with some documents in a garage or something. What's happened?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So classified documents have been found in Joe Biden's garage, but it's fine because they're stored next to his Corvette, which he truly values, and it's a locked garage, and so you're fine. He values the Corvette, his dream car, above almost the importance of classified documents. This is an interesting story, okay? So everybody's aware of it, that I think now that these classified documents have been found. This is important for two reasons. These classified document stories are just a hype. They tried getting Trump on this with his... If you remember, Trump's personal residence, Mar-a-Lago, was raided by the FBI looking for classified documents. It was this huge story, and oh my God, Trump has to go to prison for this. This is the kind of thing that establishments do to try and discredit political leaders, etc. What's interesting is this now is happening to Biden, and so this has two effects. It gets Trump off the hook. There cannot be a legitimate prosecution of Trump. But most of the criticism, most of the driving of this story is coming from Biden's own side. Okay, this is coming out of the New York Times. This is coming out of NBC. We've talked about this a lot over the last year. There is a move in the Democratic Party to replace Biden. You are now beginning to see the Democrats moving against Joe Biden. And that's the subtext of the story. Nobody cares about documents, stored in garages and stuff. Nobody ever cared about it. It's a complete load of guff, all that stuff, that side of it, everybody clutching their pearls. What's happening is the move to replace Biden is now underway.
Very sneaky. I didn't even think about that. That's probably exactly it, isn't it? It's like subterfuge. You're going to sort of make him sort of look bad, so then in the end he has to go. But that means, as you said, they can't really do more with Trump, can they? Because then, obviously, then they'd have to get rid of him as well. So that doesn't make sense. But what is the latest with Trump?
Well, Trump is obviously crowing about this and pointing out that he hasn't, nobody's got a leg to stand on against him. Trump is in very, very good favour with the party. Look, again, stuff we've talked about that nobody else was talking about. Trump has come out and said that we lost the midterms because of the Supreme Court withdrawing Roe v. Wade. So it was the abortion laws being repealed, the abortion protection being repealed. Trump has been very vocal about this now in the last couple of weeks, blaming the Republicans for running on that kind of issue, which was going to be a huge vote loser. So he's definitely not stepping down. He's not leaving the race. It's going to be... Look, it would be Christmas for me if it could be Trump and Hillary Clinton again in 2024. That is possibly on our radar.
Now, finally, Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, now wanting to ban gas stoves. I mean, we've got our very own ones here, but who is this guy and what's going on? Or is it a she?
No, it's a woman. It's a she, yeah. Alexandria Ocasio... Well, let's not presume. I don't know what the pronouns. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, celebrity... Exactly. Celebrity, basically celebrity activist, member of the US Congress, 14th District of New York. so we've got the war in Ukraine, climate change, human rights in China, but it's apparently gas stoves is the biggest threat to mankind. Apparently they cause cognitive decline, which might explain they've left the gas on at the White House, perhaps. But anyway, brain damage, they're saying that they cause. But anyway, so she's made these points about, and this is not just conjecture. This is coming out of Biden's Consumer Product Safety Commissioner has pinpointed gas stoves, and she's just repeating the message, and she's completely behind it, whilst she's saying it on Instagram with a gas stove in the background in the kitchen. So everybody basically is enjoying the benefit of a lovely heated muffin, but not looking at the dangers of the brain damage that will ensue. So yeah, it's a dangerous world out there, but the threat is in your kitchen.
Well, everyone knows not to leave the gas on. It's quite straightforward. Listen, Paul Dadridge, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. That is Paul Dadridge. He's the host of the Politics People podcast. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. More to come in the next hour. So good afternoon. If you just joined me, where on earth have you been? You've missed the first hour, but don't worry, there's so much more to come. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. But first, it's 5 o'clock. Let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. It's just gone 5 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl also required hospital treatment, with one of them suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowland says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight that crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. 4 people are still missing. The search operation has been paused until tomorrow morning. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. It comes as anti-strike legislation, which would require minimum service levels, is due to be debated by MPs on Monday. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. Sir Keir Starmer is calling for an overhaul of the NHS, saying it must reform or it will die. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says a Labour government would turn GPs into direct NHS employees, rather than allowing them to run their own practices. He also announced plans to allow some patients, such as those with back pain, to self-refer themselves to specialists.
We'll double the number of medical students using money from abolishing the non-dom status for the super rich, but also we need to look at the way GPs operate and see whether we can't make changes there, things which will actually preserve the NHS going forward. The moment what the government's doing is really just presiding over managed decline, and that I will not accept. Of course there will be challenges whenever you reform something, but frankly, if you don't reform the NHS, then I fear it will die.
The Prime Minister is asking government ministers to help persuade global allies to give more support to Ukraine and help break the stalemate with Russia. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced the UK would be sending 14 tanks to Kyiv. With the first anniversary of the war approaching, Mr Sunak is stressing the need for an international strategy. Former Major General Chip Chapman was head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. He told us Russia isn't backing down.
So it's really this shift in the red lines which will probably lead to other countries in the next 2 weeks also giving armour to the Ukrainians, which gives them this idea of a winning faster strategy in 2023. Of course, the enemy on the other side gets a vote in that. And it looks like the Russians are going to mobilize another 500,000 men this year on top of the 300,000 they mobilized in October. So there's a lot of hard fighting to come yet.
Russia has launched a major missile attack on Ukraine, striking vital energy facilities across the country and destroying an apartment building. Officials say at least 21 people have been killed and 40 are still unaccounted for. Ukrainian authorities say the coming days will be difficult, with threats to the supply of electricity, water and heating during the height of winter. And the UK is facing more than 100 flood warnings, with cold and wet conditions set to continue well into next week. The Environment Agency had issued 192 flood alerts, whilst yellow warnings for ice are in place for much of Scotland and the northwest and northeast of England. The Met Office is also warning that a few centimetres of snow is likely at low levels. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Nana.
It's just coming up to 5 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing. At times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is GB News presenter Andrew Pearce and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Now, still to come each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, I'm joined by a blonde bombshell socialite. We'll be talking all about her life, her career, her romances and heartbreaks. Can you guess who it is? No, it's not Camilla. GB News at GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. And now it's time for this week's Outside. From appearing on catwalks as a model in Paris to working in advertising agencies, Secret Guest has seen it all. Being a former it girl, she's not one to shy away from the camera. She's dated Formula One drivers, singers and even a prince. With her partying days behind her, we thought it'd be nice to catch up with this socialite and see where she is at in her career and in her life. Did you guess correctly? Of course, joining me live is Lady Victoria Hervey. Hello, Lady Victoria.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I love the purple.
Thank you.
Purple and green, my favourite colours.
A bit of velvet, keeping me warm.
Lovely. So, Lady Victoria, can I call you Victoria? Is that
yeah, Victoria's good.
So, Victoria, talk to me about your life then. A lot of people may not know your background. I mean, well, how come you're a lady?
So, I'm a lady. My father was a Marquess. My father was the Marquess of Bristol. And automatically, the children become lords or ladies, and my brother is the current Marquess of Bristol, which he inherited that title when my half-brother died. Oh. So I'm just lady, he gets Marquess.
So what does it mean when you grow up as a lady? Does that mean that you get have the nice schools and everything? What's it like?
Well, you know, I was at my prep school. I started boarding when I was 9 years old. Oh. Yeah, and I didn't tell anybody at school about the lady bit. And my grandmother wrote me a letter with lady in front of it, and then I had to, explain to my friends like why I had this other name. It was something that I kind of hid as long as I could. And
what does it do? Does it open doors for you?
I mean, yeah, I suppose it does. It has advantages. You know, when I moved to LA when I was about 27, for me that was sort of like, I suppose, an escape, running away from the whole sort of aristocratic roots and having a title, and I could just sort of be Victoria and less people know me. And back then there was no social media. There was no, Facebook was starting. You could be really kind of inconspicuous and sort of just disappear over there. But I'm happy to be back.
You're back now?
Yeah.
So talk to me through your sort of early life. You had a gap year, you went to Florence.
I did. I had a gap year. I was going to be studying history of art and French. I spoke French fluently because I grew up in Monaco. We moved there when I was about 3 years old. So that was always like a language I could do, and I always knew I could get an A in, which was a big advantage growing up. I definitely was one of those people that when I studied for my exams, it was all kind of like, you know, very last minute. I was always very fluky at school, actually. I was always...
you were lucky.
Lucky, but I would work really hard, but like at the last minute, it would be like Pro Plus, you know, listening to Aerosmith, staying up all
Everyone
night.
used to do that. There's caffeine pills that kept you
But
awake.
Florence was amazing. I was there for about 6 months, and I travelled around Asia for about 3 months. Met a girl at school who she was based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, so that was our sort of base camp, and then we travelled around from there.
I've been there. I've been to Kuala Lumpur.
Did a Queen's Secretarial course as well.
Oh, very good.
Learnt shorthand and all the other secretarial skills. And then I started temping. And I had, you know, a lot of quite good jobs, actually. I started at this magazine called Music Week magazine.
I remember Music Week. Is that still going?
I don't know.
It's still going.
I was there, then I was at De Winters, which was a theatrical advertising, and then I was at Mauro Farrell, which was like another advertising company. I was like the young one, so I was sort of given like all the jobs basically that no one wanted to do.
But didn't you? I just want to bring you back
Tatler
to
magazine.
Tatler, yeah.
That was my first like interning job. Was at Tatler. And actually the first photo shoot I ever did for a magazine ended up being with Tatler magazine, and I was a cowgirl in New Mexico.
Was this the risque photograph, or was that another one? Because there was a risque
that was
one that was in a newspaper, wasn't it? And your profile went
Yeah,
up there.
the risque one, actually that was a paparazzi shot. I was at an event and I had a dress that, you know, what is it about English media and photography? They're all just like perverts. Like, I was wearing a dress. I mean, what is wrong with
Well, look, if you've got it flaunted, they're showing
no,
you.
I was wearing a dress and it was a little skimpy, and a photographer got it sort of on a side angle, and suddenly that was on the front of the Sun newspaper. And they just carried on putting me on the front of the papers.
Yeah, but I think if that happened to me, I wouldn't be on the front. I'd probably be somewhere back. Look at that embarrassing woman there. Now, talk to me about, because obviously in the circles that you mix with, you get to talk to royalty. I know you know different members of the royal family. Have you met Harry? Have you met Meghan? Who have you met in the royal family?
I haven't met Meghan. I met Harry and William, you know, years ago when I was living in England, when they were sort of out and about on the scene. And, you know, well, Zara I've met because Mike Tyndall, I did the jump with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I met her a couple times, actually, and then she came out to Austria. And then...
So what was Harry? What were Harry and William like then? What was Harry like?
You know, he was super young back then. I'd say he was very eager, you know, like that sort of young boy, eagerish. My brother was at Eton as well, so they were a little bit younger than him. A couple years younger than him, but I know, yeah, dated some Etonians as well.
Now, we won't talk about it, but I know you know Andrew.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, you met Andrew as well. Now, listen, this is interesting. What's your take on this whole Harry and Meghan thing?
What is my whole take?
Yeah,
as in, like, the book?
No,
or
but
the relationship?
All of it. Where are you at with it when you see it all unfolding?
I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised it's lasted this long. But I don't know how much more is going to... how much more can come out after this? You know, we've got the Harry book, now we're going to have the Meghan book. He's sort of like just... There's nothing that he hasn't said at this point, I think, you know? I don't know. I see it just kind of collapsing at some point, and him coming back to England and it being a really messy divorce, and she's going to end up with some... you know, big American billionaire and just dump him.
Because to me, I mean, this is just my opinion, but he seems to have sort of an addictive sort of personality.
Yeah.
You know, if you go out with those people and they just really cling to you, and I don't know whether he follows that through his life in other things.
Well, obviously, you know, the death of his mother really hit him so hard. You know, I mean, I lost my father when I was under 9 years old.
That's
and
sad.
For me, it was really, really hard. It was terrible, but then it wasn't. If it was something like a car accident and the whole world saw it, that would be like a much even worse, right?
How did your father die?
He died of emphysema.
Oh, okay.
But it's just like, you know, just remembering all of that. I guess with him, he just couldn't properly mourn because he was so much in the public eye. You
But
know?
because when he talks about it, it was in his book. He sort of imagines that she's not actually dead,
Right,
And he pretends that she's still alive,
and then he goes to Paris and he goes in the tunnel
and he sees that it's not really that.
and
anything.
he's obviously just so traumatized by this. And I think when Meghan came along, it was like some sort of addiction, and she totally fed into all of it, and she gave him exactly what he wanted, you know, at the time.
Yeah.
What he was craving, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that going to last? I don't know. You know, I think one addiction goes into another one, and right now, you know, he's into Meghan, but I think it will go into something else after.
That'll be interesting to see how that pans out. And for you, how did you get over the death of your father, obviously? I mean, do you remember much about him? Because you were quite young, and sometimes we sort of block out those sort of memories.
No, I do. I do have, like, a lot of memories. I'm actually born on my father's birthday.
Okay.
So he was called Victor, hence I'm called Victoria. And then he died the day after my sister's birthday.
Oh, no.
My sister's born on the 9th of March. He died on the 10th of March. So I know my mother was, like, desperately praying that he wouldn't die on her birthday, you know, because that would have been even more terrible. But no, I was very close to him, and I do have quite a lot of good memories.
Yes, it's nice to have memories of him. And I wanted to ask you now this. So what is your game plan now? What are you up to?
Well, a lot of different things. I have a fashion brand I'm going to be relaunching here called Ladyship, which I just started with swimwear, but I'm going to be doing like all different ranges. That brand Harvey Henshaw that I'm doing with Scott Henshaw, who's a friend of mine for 20 years, who was creative director at Mulberry, and then some TV projects that I'm getting my hands into.
You met Donald Trump. I've seen a picture of you with Trump.
I did.
What's he like?
I did.
I really
and then I
like
started getting messages going, "Are you working for Donald Trump now?" From like friends of mine in LA. I was like, guys, I'm just hanging out in Palm Beach. I was actually going to move to Palm Beach last year. And then when I was back here during Jubilee, I was like, I actually just really miss England. But I do love Palm Beach.
Yeah. So what's Donald Trump like? I mean, I think he seems like a really fun guy.
Do you know what?
I think he's got a great sense of humour.
He has a great sense of humour.
think so.
And he's just... So I was briefed just before the lunch. I was told, OK, a few things don't talk about. Don't mention Kanye, because this was right after the Kanye West scenario. Don't mention Kanye. Just be very aware. We've probably got bugs under our tables. He has full Secret Service shadowing him around. So we get there. And I'm told to be there at 12:30 because he's going to walk in the dining room between 1 and 1:30. That's his schedule. And he sits by this certain table with a big flag behind him. We were on the next door table. So my friend worked for him at the White House, and she's very close to him. So in he walks, exactly, you know, on time. Comes in, I get introduced as Lady Victoria, because I was at Mar-a-Lago in March, but I didn't get... it was a very kind of a brief thing. So I was there for Giuliani. It was an event for Giuliani. But this time I actually got to properly have a conversation. And so we started talking. He had Kari Lake on speakerphone. He's like, who wants to talk to Kari Lake? And then we chat a bit, we have our food, and then he sort of like... I gave one of these hats. So in the golf club, there's basically a souvenir shop. And I was told if I want something signed to get a hat, you know, these hats actually go on, online. They're like $10,000.
So did he sign the hat?
Two hats for me.
Signed 2 hats?
So the woman in the restaurant kind of was like, do you want the hat? So I'm about to give her the hat. And then he's just like, oh, if you need something, come over. So I go over to the table. I stand there, and he's signing some stuff. And then he starts talking, and he asks me about the Queen, and he's like, you know, I think I was Queen's favourite president.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
And after that, and then he starts asking me some stuff about Boris and saying that he thought Boris had gone a bit too liberal. and just really funny stuff. But I forgot the whole thing about Kanye. So the first thing he actually says when he walks in that dining room, he sits down, good to meet you, Lady Victoria. He actually goes, now, I want to ask you about what happened with me when Kanye West arrived. So basically everything I was told not to talk about, he just
talk about it.
he just went straight in.
Well, listen, Victoria, we're running out of time. I could talk to you for ages, Victoria Hervey. Thank you very much. It's just lovely to talk to you.
Good to chat with you.
Lady Victoria Hervey, that was Outside. Coming up, stay with me. It's a great British debate this out. I'm asking, do you trust Labour with the NHS? Sir Keir Starmer is calling for an overhaul of the NHS, saying it must reform or die. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says a future Labour government would turn GPs into direct NHS staff rather than allowing them to run their own practices under contract. All of that after your weather.
Hello again. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, but looking ahead weather-wise, and it's going to remain cold. There'll be snow for some of us, but also quite a bit of winter sunshine to look forward to as well. The reason for the cold weather is this area of low pressure to the east of us. That's allowing for our winds to come from the north, so cold Arctic air plunging across the UK, which is why it's going to be so cold. Notice this weather system waiting out in the west. That's going to fringe south coastal parts as we go through Sunday night. Otherwise, for many through Sunday night, yes, there'll be some clear spells. Also, some showery rain, sleet or snow across some northern parts could lead to something of an ice risk here. And snow showers piling in from the north across parts of Scotland. These totals could build up as we go through the night. It is going to be a cold night, even in the south, some places falling below freezing, could get as low as -10 in the sheltered parts of Scotland. The rain, sleet and snow across parts of the southeast could cause some problems early doors, but that will clear away as we go through the morning. Otherwise then, through Monday, for many, it is going to be largely dry with lots of winter sunshine around. Yes, there'll be some showers towards the east and also plenty of showers towards parts of Scotland, and here they are readily going to be falling as snow. But for many, largely dry with sunny spells. Despite that though, it's cold, colder than today for most places, generally staying in mid-single figures Celsius. Little change for many as we go through Monday evening, and so most places staying largely clear, but continue to see snow showers across parts of Scotland, and then some showery rain, sleet and snow starting to push in from the southwest as we go through the night. Need to keep an eye on this because there could be some significant snow across some southwestern parts as we go through the early hours of Tuesday. It is going to be a colder night than this coming night for many, could even get as low as -11 or -12 perhaps in the sheltered glens of Scotland. Through Tuesday then, a cold, frosty, icy start for many of us first thing. Watch out for this showery rain, sleet and snow across southern parts. A little bit of uncertainty regarding how much snow we're going to see, but it is worth keeping up to date with that. There'll be further wintry weather as we go through the rest of the week, perhaps drier on Thursday, but staying cold. Bye-bye for now. See you later.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. This is coming up to 24 minutes after 5 o'clock. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time now for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, do you trust Labour with the NHS? Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has warned that the NHS must reform or die, whilst calling for huge changes to the service if elected. Now, Starmer vows to get rid of what he calls bureaucratic nonsense to allow patients to bypass GPs and self-refer themselves to specialists. Let's just remind ourselves of what was said earlier this morning.
We'll double the number of medical students using money from abolishing the non-dom status for the super rich, but also we need to look at the way GPs operate and see whether we can't make changes there, things which will actually preserve the NHS going forward. The moment what the government's doing is really just presiding over managed decline, and that I will not accept. Of course there will be challenges whenever you reform something, but frankly if you don't reform the NHS then I fear it will die.
Also formally gave back into his shadow Health Secretary's reform, calling to nationalise all GP services rather than running their own practices under contracts. And just yesterday, Wes Streeting told the newspaper the NHS is often run in the interests of doctors rather than patients and must reform to survive for the future. He went on to say that if the party wins power at the next general election, all patients will have the choice over how they see their doctor. But Labour's proposals follow a backdrop of pressures on Our Health Service and industrial action being taken by nurses and ambulance workers. And last week, figures showed that the proportion of patients seen within 4 hours in England's A&E fell to a record low of 65% in December, and roughly 1 in 8 people in the UK are currently stuck on NHS waiting lists for various procedures. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, do you trust Labour with the NHS? To break this down further, I'm joined by former Labour Special Advisor and columnist Paul Richards and former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. Right, I'm going to start with you, Paul. Sir Keir suggested that young doctors were not keen on taking on the burdens and liabilities of the current system as older GPs leave the workforce. What do you think that he actually means by that?
Well, the system of GPs we have in the UK is a leftover from the days before the National Health Service. And the doctors were such a powerful force that even Anira Bevan, the founder of the NHS, couldn't persuade their union to fully integrate into the National Health Service. So he had to set this thing up where they were almost like private contractors running their own businesses, owning their own properties, deciding where to open and close and all the rest of it. He famously said he stuffed their mouths with gold in order for them to sign up to NHS services. So it's a little bit of unfinished business, really. And if you are a doctor, I would say, well, surely you're more interested in caring for patients than worrying about the rent on your premises or where to open or all the other things that go along, employing people, all the things that go alongside being, in effect, a small business. So he's coming at it from the point of view of the patient. And the idea is that we get a better service from our National Health Service as a result.
OK, Ben, do you agree with that? Is Keir Starmer onto something when he says that radical changes must be made? What do you think?
Well, he's right that radical changes need to be made. And I think, in a sense, he's playing to the electorate when he says that, because we all recognise that the NHS, which is now, for the first time in history on strike, in effect, needs radical change. But nationalising the GP service and introducing self-referrals is frankly tinkering at the edges. And the notion that the Labour Party or the government, if they become the government, could run GP services or indeed any private enterprise better than can be run privately is just a fundamentally failed one. I can't think of any business that's been nationalised by the government that's been better in government hands as a result of nationalisation than it was when it was in the private sector. This is just tinkering. What if we're really going to have an honest discussion about the NHS? We need to come to terms with the fact that we simply can't afford to deliver a free point-of-service NHS for the broad spectrum of treatments that it hands out. It was conceived in a different time under Nana Bevan when the population of the United Kingdom was 38 million. The population is now 68 million. We haven't got the doctors, we haven't got the nurses, we haven't got the money, frankly, to deliver that right across the country in the way that Nana Bevan may have wished to do it. And nationalising the GP service or introducing self-referrals or doing any of the other stuff that the Tories, frankly, are promising won't solve the problem.
Paul, what do you make of that? I mean, he's making a good point there that actually the NHS seems fundamentally flawed and can't really handle the increase in population.
Well, Ben's point that nothing nationalised works. The whole point of the NHS was, of course, it brought the private hospitals and the voluntary hospitals and the local government hospitals all into a national system, governed by an incredibly simple principle that if you are ill, you get the treatment you need at the point of need, free point of the need as well. That's a principle that's been borne out under Blair government, Thatcher government, every government you can name since 1946, and it's a very robust system indeed. Now, the argument you're making, Ben, is that things are stretched with a bigger population and all the rest of it. Absolutely right. That's why Keir Starmer's talking about reform, about recruiting more doctors, about allowing people to get treatment quicker by self-referral. I'd say there's another piece in there too, which is we've all got to take more care of our own health too. We can't just keep out handing things like statins and people not taking care of their own well-being. And of course, something that Anira and Bevan hardly touched on is mental health. And we know now we've had an epidemic of mental health problems, particularly with young people. So a reformed NHS, true to its principles, but being able to deliver this modern healthcare for a modern society is what we want. What we don't want is a return to private hospitals.
Well, Paul, perhaps though, if people were paying for more of it, they might take more care of themselves. I mean, if you think you're going to get it free at the point of need, then perhaps that's one of the reasons why people just think, oh, well, it's fine, I can use the NHS.
That doesn't work in America. That doesn't happen, where the health outcomes are worse and the rich can get the treatment they need, and a huge number of people have no insurance and have terrible health care. So I don't think that argument stacks up.
I mean, the American example is a very good one, because you only get free health service in America if you're over 67 years old. And yet the government in the US spends more money on medical health than we do in the United Kingdom. And the point I'm trying to make, I think, is that if we wish the NHS to be the kind of NHS that was conceived back in 1946, no way is the amount of money we're spending on it going to be sufficient. If you want to run it for that purpose, we're going to have to at least double the amount of money that we're spending on it. And frankly, as a nation, we cannot afford it. We've already borrowed more money than we can afford. We've now raised taxes to a level which we are ceasing to be able to afford as well, because of the level they've reached. And the nation is on its back. And before we launch into an attack on the Tories, I accept this Tory government's been a disaster for public services, national debt, taxation and everything. But to have a really honest debate about the NHS, you have to really look at what it intends to serve, what its services are. And unless those are scaled back, even fundamental basic medical assistance won't be able to be provided efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you say to that briefly? You've got a final response, Paul. You've got about 20 seconds.
Well, do you trust Labour with the NHS is the question we've been asked. If you look at the record of Labour in government, and that's what Keir Starmer was talking about it, then the highest levels of patient satisfaction ever at the time Labour left. There weren't strikes, you could get an ambulance, and we had more nurses and doctors than ever before. So the answer is yes. And
Ben Habib, your answer, do you trust them, yes or no?
Well, no, I don't trust them. And when Labour left, the country was bust. There was a note left on one of the minister's desks saying, sorry, we're run out of cash. I don't trust the Labour government with the strings of government at all. And nor much do I trust the Tories, given their performance in the last 13 years.
So there's no one left. Ben Habib, thank you so much.
Well,
who have you got? There's nobody else. Is there?
Well, there are insurgents. We need a complete change of our whole political setup.
All right, thank you so much, Ben Habib, and also Paul Richards. Lovely to talk to you both. Right, let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Excuse me. Philip says, no, if Starmer does win the next election, he'll face the same problems that the government are facing now. Only difference is even more strikes will take place with Labour in power, as the unions will expect Labour to give them exactly what they want. That's true. I suppose there's about 15 million that's gone into the Labour's coffers from the unions since 2019. Percy says, we don't really know. What is clear is that the Tories have grossly mismanaged the oversight of the NHS. And David says, if they can develop a credible plan which doesn't involve massive extra spending and employing more woke officers, possibly yes. I won't hold my breath, though. Well, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, we'll continue our great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, can Labour save the NHS? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, GBNews presenter Andrew Pearce, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 33 minutes past 5. I'm Bethany Elsey with the latest from the GB newsroom. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl also required hospital treatment, with one of them suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowland says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the domestic Yeti Airlines flight that crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. All but 4 of the bodies have been recovered. The search operation has paused until tomorrow morning. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. It comes as anti-strike legislation, which would require minimum service levels, is due to be debated by MPs on Monday. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. We'll get back to Nana in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
So it's just coming up to 38 minutes after 5 o'clock. If you just joined me, where on earth have you been? It's GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. Don't forget, you can also stream us live on YouTube. It's now time, though, for our great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, do you trust Labour with the NHS? Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has warned that the NHS must reform or die, whilst calling for huge changes to the health service if elected. Starmer vows to get rid of what he calls bureaucratic nonsense, to allow patients to bypass GPs and self-refer to specialists. Now, the proposals follow a backdrop of pressures on our health service, with industrial action being taken by nurses and ambulance workers. And last week, figures showed that the proportion of patients seen within 4 hours in England's A&E fell to a record low at 65% in December, and roughly 1 in 8 people in the UK currently are stuck on waiting lists for various procedures. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, do you trust Labour with the NHS? Well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Andrew Pearce and also Danny Kelly. Gosh, I don't know who to go first. I'll go with you first. Go on,
Pointing
Danny.
at me.
Yow.
I'm prepared to give Labour a shot. I think what Keir Starmer has concluded with the terrible election with Corbyn in 2019 is that there needs to be a balance between capitalism and socialism. So what he's doing here, he's satisfying the hard left of the Labour Party by saying, I'm going to go after the non-doms and all of those billions. And then I'm satisfying the centrists and the right of the Labour Party by saying everything that is so appealing about, you know, recruiting more doctors and avoiding the GP. Now, that was peculiar. I can imagine. He gave two examples of why you should avoid the GP. One was a bad back. Now, Andrew and I are both suffering from bad backs. Yeah. But the other...
I just pulled something this morning. It'll get better.
The other example was internal bleeding. So I can imagine...
I don't think that's...
Danielle, I've got internal bleeding. Well, don't worry. Let me go to Google. I'll tell you what's wrong with you. No need to call the GP, and then you can get yourself a consultant. He used internal bleeding. That was his example.
But none of that is thought through. So Mr. Bloggings or Mrs. Bloggings calls up a consultant say, a consultant physiotherapist says, I want to see you because I've got a bad back. They're going to say, get stuffed. They're just not going to rely on someone saying, well, I've got this aching back. Of course you're going to have to see a doctor to decide whether you're malingering, whether you're putting it on, or whether there really is a problem. What he's not doing is dealing with the fact that people can't get to see their GPs, and they should be able to get to see their GPs, and he's doing nothing about that.
Well, I think that's what he's doing, because I think he's coming from a private medical healthcare perspective. I don't think he quite understands how the NHS works.
Right.
Because if you're private, so for example, I have private medical cover. I will have to go to my GP, which I think is a waste of time, and then the GP then says, oh, OK, well, we'll refer you to the private medical. Instead of doing that, what you would do is just call your private provider and get it done. That's fine for private, but how is he going to do that for the NHS? Where is the intermediary? Who are you going to call? Do you just call a specialist? Do you look up? I don't know what he's talking about.
One thing he addressed is the fact that, again, going back to his party, the left of the Labour Party almost consider the NHS as a sacred cow, a deity, an institution that is more than just a godlike institution that cannot be interfered with. The German model, I was doing some research on this, the German model is completely state-funded, but there's an element of mandatory health insurance, OK? So they will treat you, if you have a heart attack in Germany, then they'll treat you. If you have a bust, say, for example, you want a knee replacement, then you have to go towards the health insurance part of your tax. But the difference between Bupa, which I have and you have, we all probably have, the difference between Bupa is that they are a commercial interest. So they want to make money for their shareholders, whereas the German model of private healthcare is funded by the government.
Well, I think there's no way we can fix the NHS without some element of health insurance being part of it. And you've not heard a word from Keir Starmer on that. Sadly, we haven't heard the Tories saying it either. But he talks as well in the Telegraph today, Starmer, in an interview about this bureaucracy. Steve Barclay identified more than 50,000 bureaucrats who are costing the NHS £3 billion a year. None of them are involved in providing patient care. What are they doing?
What the hell are they doing?
They are pen pushers, and we need them out. And is the Labour leader going to get rid of the £40 million we spend on diversity officers in the NHS? 40 million.
Well, you know, there have been a couple of things. I mean, there was a study that was done by a think tank that suggested that middle-class families should be given sort of greater security, so they pay a bit of extra national insurance, so that they get a bumper for the welfare and things like that. Perhaps there is a way of doing that so that it also incorporates healthcare as well.
Maybe.
So that you could pay a little bit extra so that you can have this extra thing.
But the other thing, then, none of this is going to happen unless we sort out social care. Because that's the really big elephant in the room. We've got thousands of people in hospitals, bed blockers, normally older people who should be out of hospitals. They need to be in what we used to call old people's homes, but we're not allowed to call them that anymore. But there's no provision for it because this government has screwed it up for the last 10 years, and so did the previous government.
But some of those
they've
care
ducked it for
homes
30
have
years.
space. Quite a few of those care homes have space. So why are they not sort of... If the government is paying for people to be in hotels and this and that, and we're paying for migrants to be in hotels and things like that, why can't we afford to actually have our older generation, if they are well enough, to go to these care homes to recuperate, and then eventually, if they have somewhere to live, then go to their
back
place.
to their home.
I mean, isn't that the wise thing? Why are the government not putting money into that? Because not all the care homes.
I know.
It would be a great business and also probably mean that you could increase the wages of the people who are carers and then you attract more people.
I laughed out loud when I read that they're going to put some of these older patients in hotels. There's no room. They're full of migrants.
Of course they are. Yes, that's the point.
So there's absolutely no room for them there. Forget it.
But they're prepared to pay
They're
for
talking now
migrants to
about
go
putting
there.
patients in hotels.
No,
when
to free up the bed blocking.
Yeah.
Instead
Well,
of perhaps
good luck, because you'll find how many thousands of migrants are in our hotels at the moment.
They should be really investing that in the care homes. If you put it in the care home system, then you could actually encourage that sector and, again, potentially pay care workers much more money. I don't really understand where the joined-up thinking is.
Just finally, did you know that there are 13% of adults who have private healthcare? Some privately funded by myself. And if you work for a great organisation like this...
And it's rising all the time.
This media group, then they look after the members of staff with private healthcare.
And I knocked the Prime Minister for 6 in the mail this week in a piece I wrote about the fact his abject failure to answer that question directly when he was asked last week. Do you have private health insurance?
Awful.
Failed to answer the question 3 times, like banging on about my dad was a GP, my mum... We don't...
How stupid does he think we are? Does he think that we can't hear?
Don't take us for fools.
Eventually, then he said it was independent healthcare. It's like, why
which is private. What is he frightened of? He's married to the daughter of a billionaire. Their fortune is worth 750 million. Do we really want the Prime Minister of this country to be getting on the phone at 5 to 8 every morning to try and get through to the GP?
And
then to be told at 5 past 8, you're number 73 in the queue?
Wait for a knee replacement attendance. Of course he's private.
Well, listen, let's get the viewers and let's see what they think, because this show is nothing without them. Let's welcome our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing today. I've got 4 of them. Excellent. Let's start with Julie Ford in Bedford. Julie, what's your view on this?
I really agree with the panel, to be honest with you. There does need to be a lot of overhaul with the NHS, but the problem is, again, Keir Starmer, the same as what the Tories have done, is looking at small fixes, and they're not going to work, because if you fix one tiny little thing, there's going to be a knock-on effect somewhere else. It really does need somebody to have some time in the position of health secretary. That doesn't help either. These secretaries don't stay in their job long enough to even implement anything that they want to do that will make changes. I think it's what Andrew said about this £40 million going towards diversity. We don't really need that. That's 40 million that can be spent better somewhere else. And really, if Keir Starmer genuinely has the answer, why does he need to wait until he's in power? Why doesn't he walk up to Rishi and say, look, I know how to fix this. Let's do it. Let's work together for the people.
Well, because he wants to be in power and he's not going to give out his hand, and he's always sitting on the fence. He never actually says anything. He spends a lot of time talking, doesn't say anything. Right, let's go over to David Balm. He's there in Watford. David, what do you think? Do you trust Labour with the NHS?
Good afternoon, Nana. No. 2 things. First of all, Wales NHS is probably worse than most second-rate countries. It has the highest weight, and it's been run by Labour ever since devolution. And the next thing is Brown-Blair came up with this great private-public initiative to save the NHS, sharing it with the NHS. It's rubbish. The only way is actually to tip it upside down, start again, bring in accounts of insurance, not have a two-tier state, but have insurance there for the stuff that isn't covered. So if you want to have cosmetic surgery on the NHS, fine, have the insurance. If you need to see someone about your weight and you're not prepared to get off your ass and exercise or stop eating the rubbish, then pay the insurance. Very simple.
Very good. Obviously, we can't say that on a Sunday anyway, but thank you very much for that, David. Right, let's go to Brian Dugan. He's there, and I'm going to guess he's in Solihull. Brian Dugan, are you in Solihull? Yeah. So what
Yes,
do you think?
I am, Nana.
Do you trust Labour then with the NHS? Do you think Keir Starmer is being... Do you think he'll do what he says he's going to do?
Well, I agree with the panel, Nana, in terms of what Danny and Andrew suggested in terms of some kind of insurance underpinned by government, getting rid of the pen pushers, the middle managers that don't seem to contribute an iota, and that frees up money. In terms of what Keir Starmer has been talking about, I think some of it's getting into the minutiae in terms of the back pain and internal bleeding. Not so sure about that, but I think overall, in terms of being ruthless about fundamental change and getting rid of bureaucracy, I think that absolutely has to happen, or we're in the realms of existential crisis with our NHS, and we simply cannot have that.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. Lastly, let's go to Adam Wall-Smith, who's there in Durham. Adam, what do you think? The NHS, do you trust it in the hands of the Labour Party?
Yeah, I think we've got to get rid of this sort of
feeling that the NHS has got an absolute right to exist despite it being plagued by however many crises. The thing is, I don't think Keir Starmer's thought through a lot of his plans for the NHS. One is, of course, the greater use of the private sector. He wants NHS patients to be able to use private hospitals. But the thing is, there's only about 8,000 hospital beds in the private sector. That's compared with about 150,000 in the NHS. So I don't think the private sector is going to be the silver bullet Labour reckons it will be. But I don't think Labour could do much worse than the government at the moment, surely.
Well, that's worrying though, isn't it? Well, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. Julie in Bedford, David in Watford, Brian in Solihull, and of course Adam there in Durham. Thank you so much. Right, and now for my quick mini debate. A 7-year-old girl was left with a life-threatening injury after she and 5 others were hurt in a drive-by shooting on Saturday near a church in London. With more and more stories of violent crimes breaking the headlines these days, how safe do you feel in your neighbourhood? Let's see what my panel make of that. Joining me now, Andrew Pearce and also Danny Kelly. Andrew, I mean, it seems to be, this is the second drive-by shooting I've heard.
Yeah, what's especially shocking, they were coming out of church. They'd been to a memorial service to celebrate the life of a mum and a daughter who died within 25 days of each other. It's nothing sacred. They just pull up, I mean, 7-year-old girl with life-threatening injuries. It isn't safe. I don't feel safe, and London at times feels like the Wild West. And yet we get the Mayor of London, who's in charge of law and order. He is the Police and Crime Commissioner, banging on in the last week about the single market and we haven't got Brexit right. No, stick to your day job, mate, and make our streets safe. And he's carrying on closing, by the way, police stations in the capital, which I think is a retrograde step.
Well, I mean, it's not just the capital as well. I mean, there was the one in Liverpool as well, the shooting there, Danny.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel safe in London. I wouldn't feel safe in Liverpool necessarily. I'm lucky to live in a very rural part of the West Midlands in Warwickshire, and I feel safe in Warwick and I feel safe in Royal Leamington Spa. The indiscriminate nature of a shotgun as well. As a car is moving past a group of people, it's anything but targeted. You know, if it was stationary, it was a pistol. There was someone in that party who was obviously in a dispute with something. And I think it is reprehensible that someone drives past a group of people, and I take your point about the ceremony and the nature of the day, but to use a shotgun which just spreads and can hit so many people.
Well, that's the worry, isn't it? And what we're thinking here is the indiscriminate nature of these sort of crimes. I mean, it's not just, I mean, you said you feel safe where you are, but it seems that nothing is sacred. And in my view, I'm sort of concerned about the way the mindset and the mentality of people seems to be evolving, and then the lacklustre approach of, you know, some of the forces and the way this is allowed to escalate in this way in the first place.
And only last week, I'm afraid, the new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, said London is fantastically safe. No, it isn't, Commissioner.
Garbage.
No, it isn't.
Just a final point. Mayor Khan, I think, isn't an advocate of stop and search.
No.
At the end of the year, there was a poster of all the people who'd lost their lives by knife crime. I think if you were to ask the mothers and fathers of those beautiful young faces that were dead and killed,
often teenagers,
whether they want to bring back stop and search, I think then you'd have a different aspect.
Well, I mean, he's focusing on, what is it, extending you, Les?
Oh, my God.
And still, and we now have the great dubious distinction of London being the most congested city in Europe as well. Well done, Mayor Khan.
Good job, yes. Well, let's move on, because it's now time for Supplement Sunday, where my panel and I discuss some of the news stories that have caught their eye. Joining me now, of course, Andrew Pearce and broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Danny, we'll start with you.
OK, we've got someone who's worth £50 million and she shops in second-hand shops. Deborah Meaden.
Is it Nana?
Deborah Meaden.
Second-hand shops.
Now, this is virtue signalling at its finest, but also there's something, I think, quite mean about this. People do double takes when they see me in charity shops. Dragon's Den, Deborah Meaden. Well, do us a favour, Deborah. This is all about sustainability. Stop your virtue signalling. You've got 50 million quid. If you don't want to blow it, I'll have some of it. But also, stop taking the best second-hand clobber off the shelves from people who are skint.
That's a very good point.
And spend a lot of
very good point.
It's a great point. You go in there because you're skint and you got some filthy rich Dragon's Den bird.
And she's
buying everything.
And she's bragging about it.
And she's bragging about it.
But she's trying to show that she's down like everybody else. Andrew.
Mail on Sunday, very good. At last, Rishi Sunak's going to appoint an anti-woke czar. It's an academic, a guy of Asian background. Terrific, wants to challenge all the cancel policy in universities and also try and stop all these bishops being so left-wing. One anti-woke czar And I think there's 10,000 people paid for by the taxpayer involved in this whole woke diversity area. It's going to be like King Canute on the beach, isn't it? And by the way, why do we need a czar? Why don't ministers and the Prime Minister take it on themselves?
This is ridiculous. Anti-woke. It's all. You don't need all of that. You just need to change things so that nothing is woke. I've had enough of it. Right. Well, now to my supplement, and finally, the unveiling of Boston's new Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King embracing statue did not go to plan, where the angle of the photos taken made it look rather phallic. Have a look at that.
Dear.
How would you describe if you're listening on the radio, it looks like a man holding... You know.
Yeah.
Someone else's todger.
As I suppose in the words of Prince Harry.
What, his frostbitten one?
His frostbitten one. It looks like that. You can check it out on the GBNews app or check it out on YouTube. You can have a look at the show.
Good spot.
There. Yeah, so what do you think? Does it look like that to you?
It does.
Well, yeah, it does.
Quite an impressive one.
Well endowed.
Yes. Sort of made his hands look small. Right. Well, on today's show, I've been asking, should everyone have the right to strike? And according to our Twitter poll, 48% of you say yes, 52% of you say no. I've got to say a huge thank you to my panel, GB News presenter Andrew Pearce. Andrew, thank you so much as ever. Nice to see you. And also a massive thank you to journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly.
Man. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A big thank you for a massive personality. And also a huge thank you to you for joining me at home with your company. It's always a pleasure to see you. I'm actually doing Patrick's show this week, so I'll see you tomorrow between 3 and 6. Enjoy. I'll leave you with the weather. Have a good day.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello again. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, but looking ahead weather-wise, and it's going to remain cold. There'll be snow for some of us, but also quite a bit of winter sunshine to look forward to as well. The reason for the cold weather is this area of low pressure to the east of us. That's allowing for our winds to come from the north, so cold Arctic air plunging across the UK, which is why it's going to be so cold. Notice this weather system waiting out in the west. That's going to fringe south coastal parts as we go through Sunday night. Otherwise, for many through Sunday night, yes, there'll be some clear spells. Also, some showery rain, sleet or snow across some northern parts could lead to something of an ice risk here. And snow showers piling in from the north across parts of Scotland. These totals could build up as we go through the night. It is going to be a cold night, even in the south. Some places falling below freezing. Could get as low as -10 in the sheltered parts of Scotland. The rain, sleet and snow across parts of the southeast could cause some problems early doors, but that will clear away as we go through the morning. Otherwise then, through Monday, for many, it is going to be largely dry with lots of winter sunshine around. Yes, there'll be some showers towards the east and also plenty of showers towards parts of Scotland, and here they are readily going to be falling as snow. But for many, largely dry with sunny spells. Despite that, though, it's cold. Colder than today for most places, generally staying in mid-single figures Celsius. Little change for many as we go through Monday evening, and so most places staying largely clear, but continue to see snow showers across parts of Scotland, and then some showery rain, sleet and snow starting to push in from the southwest as we go through the night. Need to keep an eye on this because there could be some significant snow across some southwestern parts as we go through the early hours of Tuesday. It is going to be a colder night than this coming night for many, could even get as low as -11 or -12 perhaps in the sheltered glens of Scotland. Through Tuesday then, a cold, frosty, icy start for many of us first thing. Watch out for this showery rain, sleet and snow across southern parts. A little bit of uncertainty regarding how much snow we're going to see, but it is worth keeping up to date with that. There'll be further wintry weather as we go through the rest of the week, perhaps drier on Thursday, but staying cold. Bye-bye for now. See you later.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.